Hey, welcome to another edition of Ask Octopus, where the Octopus community, customer success team answers questions that we find interesting from the community, the customers we talk to, really any source we can find questions, we use them all. So I'm Ryan Russo, and I've got Bob Walker with me today. Hey, Bob.
Hey Ryan, how you doing today?
Oh, man, I'm good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's Friday, so I'm happy.
Can't complain. 3-day weekend.
That's right.
I know this
Yeah,
is
so
going to publish in like a month, so everybody will be wondering what we're talking about.
yeah, exactly. Maybe they're thinking, oh, is it July 4th? Like, no, I think that's in the middle of the week again this year.
Oh, well, yeah. So it's a Memorial Day weekend for people tuning in from the future. But I'm going to go ahead and get started and jump in with this question. I've seen this question pop up a few times over the last few weeks, and it's how do I use Octopus.Client with a different space? So, Bob, we released Spaces back in January. It was a big breaking change to the API, but they're breaking in the sense that if you want to make calls to a specific space, you have to change the URL. But there's the concept of the default space. If you don't specify a space, it's going to use the default space automatically.
Yeah, I remember distinctly doing that with the API. Thankfully, if you don't specify the space, it uses the default space, which is great, except when you want to use the other spaces.
Right. So if you want to like make a API request against a non-default space, you put the space ID in your REST request in the URL, and that
Mm-hmm.
works fine. But the Octopus.Client is the .NET wrapper around the API, so you're not manipulating the URL like you normally would for your API request if you're using like invoke web method or invoke web request from PowerShell. So the
Yeah.
question's come up a few times. How do you change the space ID that Octopus.Client is working on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how to do that, so I'm excited to find out.
Yeah, so luckily I have also been working with the API and some examples recently. So I've had this example. So when it comes up in the community Slack, I'm like, I've got the thing for you. I have an answer. I love questions I already have the answer to.
Those are the best kind.
Those are the best kind. So I'm actually jumping in, and specifically the questions usually come around how do you do it with PowerShell? So I'm going to show it in C# first, and this is a .NET script, so CSX. Um, and then I want to show how to do it in PowerShell because it's slightly different. So I've got my standard, importing Octopus.Client, setting up my URL and API key, and then getting the repository. So with Octopus.Client, this is the object that you make your request against. So you'll have projects.add or projects.find by name, and those are making API requests behind the scenes.
Gotcha.
Got a boilerplate code here. It's like, because what this script does is creates a new space and populates it with some default environments, something that I was doing quite often, like spinning up a new space, adding dev, test, prod. So
Yeah,
scripted it out.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I've got a space resource here that I'm creating. So when I call space equals repository.spaces.create space, that's going to create the space, return it back, and I'm going to have a space resource that has the ID set, all the values needed to use that space in future requests. Now, the magic piece comes down here. I'm actually going to create a space-specific repository using repository.forSpace and then passing in that space resource. So I get a separate repository that's scoped to that space, and then I can use it later on to create my environments within that space.
So if I wanted to access a specific space, I would basically request from the client that space resource then.
Right. And I think I haven't tested this theory yet, but I think you may be able just to create a space resource. If you already know the ID, you can create a space resource and fill out the ID, because I think that's probably all it's using on in the client library.
I gotcha.
But in this case, I'm creating a brand new space. So I don't have an ID, so I have to do create. I have another script that tears down spaces. And you can also use repository.spaces find by name. So if you don't want to store the ID somewhere, you don't know the ID, you can just pass in the name, get that space resource back with the ID populated, and then use it for that. There it is, repository.forSpace space method.
Gotcha.
So pretty simple when you're in C Sharp, as far as using the for space method. The kicker is for space. I don't know if you can tell there, but this is actually a extension method
Mm-hmm.
in C Sharp. So extension methods are, a special feature of C Sharp, or I guess .NET, but C Sharp, they have that syntactic sugar. They're static methods off of a interface or a class, or I guess a class. But you have a static method that you can call off of an instance as an extension method, but you can't do that in PowerShell.
That's right.
That is what really tripped me up, trying to figure out how do I call for space. And then when I realized it was an extension method, I was like, oh, I know how to do that now. So this is the same script, but written in PowerShell using OctopusClient. So you'll see a lot of the same information. Creating my space just looks different because there's a lot more dollar signs. And then when I get to calling the for space method, because it is a extension method, was a static method, I have to reference the full class. So Octopus Client, Octopus Repository Extensions is the class that extension method lives, : and then I can call the method passing in the repository and the space.
That's true, because extension methods behind the scenes actually has two parameters. The first one's always the this, and then the actual thing that you're extending.
Right. So in this case, that this is the repository, but
Yep.
it works. It's the same method. It works exactly the same way. You just have to call it differently between PowerShell and, yeah, it's way different the way you call it between PowerShell and C Sharp, but that's calling the same method.
The nice thing is you really only have to do that once, because you're only creating that repository once, and then you can manipulate that space however you feel.
Yeah, once for every space that you're working with, and usually you probably work. I mean, I could see some administrative scripts where maybe you're iterating over every space to do some work, but
Yeah.
yeah, you create it, you save that instance off, and then you can do any work that you want to do within that space. So yeah, that's one that's come up a few times. So luckily, I had an answer. It's like, that would be a good little video to make to share with people. So that is mine for the week.
Awesome.
So that is it for me. If you have an interesting question, you can submit it to us through hello.octopus.com/askoctopus. There's a form there that you can fill out and send us a question. If you have general questions, like you're running into issues with your Octopus server, you just want to know how to do something, email support@octopus.com. We'll get you an answer back and then potentially see it on a future video. And then join us in Slack. I've mentioned it a few times throughout this video. This question has actually come up twice in community Slack. So if you have questions, there's a good community there. People are always asking questions and helping out and trying to answer where they can. So you can join that at https. I don't know why I have to mention that first part, but octopus.com/Slack. You can just type that in.
It's tough to talk and read at the exact same time.
I don't want to read everything exactly. No alt script for Ryan. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in and going through that scenario and question and answer with me. And thanks, Bob, for watching and adding your feedback.
Yeah, that was good. I'm really happy I know how to use that. I get to learn how to use the client just a little bit more each time. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. All right, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.